Good morning, everyone. The time has struck 11 on my watch, so I think we can start. I'm not sure if Linda, our presenter from Umeå, I'm not sure if she's actually on our call. She wrote me that she had a meeting beforehand, that she might be a bit late, but yeah, I don't know. I don't see any other option than to just start the webinar. Before we start, I just want to let you all know that we're recording the webinar. Yeah, so it's going to be published after we finish, and then I'll pass the word to you, Heike, to give us a bit of an introduction to today's subject.
Yes, thank you so much, Klaus. Good morning, everybody. Also from our side here in Hamburg, district of Altona. My name is Heike Bunte, and BETS is one of our lead projects here. You might know that we are it's 10 years ago that I started strictly working on active mobility. So all our 10 projects, European and national level, are dedicated highly to active mobility. In fact, we are very proud of that. And today I'm even more proud because we have two brilliant speakers, Loriane from ECF, European Cyclist Federation, and Linda from the city of Umeå, talking about extremely relevant, highly enlightening topics about gender planning, and even more important, why don't they go by night? 2 days ago, we had the International Women's Day. So this webinar is also dedicated to this specific day and topic and needs for women all over the world. I would like to hand over now to Phoebe, which is the project manager of this project. Thank you so much and enjoy.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Phoebe Schütz. I'm the project manager for BETS from the Hamburg side, and we are a lead partner in this EU project. And I wanted to talk about a little bit what is BETS actually for those of you who have only joined us today for the first time. BETS stands for Baltic Sea Region Active Mobility Solutions in darkness and in all weather conditions. And the challenge that we are facing in this project, or generally in active mobility drops substantially in bad weather, in dark times, and in the winter season. We just had in the European region, especially the Northern European region, a very harsh winter. We were faced with a lot of difficulties, and it was really clear again why it is so important to tackle this topic. So the infrastructure is neither suited nor maintained for adverse light and weather conditions. Active mobility is not attractive and feasible year-round, and especially doesn't feel safe for many user groups. And in BETS, gender planning matters because perceptions of safety and comfort directly influence people's willingness to use walking and cycling infrastructure year-round. So especially in these darker and harsher conditions, but also overall. So that's why we highlight the need for inclusive planning that considers gender perspectives as well as the needs for other vulnerable groups, because designing inclusive active mobility is not only about technical infrastructure, but also about who feels safe enough to use it every day. And in BETS, we address 4 dimensions of year-round active mobility and want to develop 2 solutions for especially city planners along these 4 themes. And especially theme 1, physical infrastructure, and theme 4, citizen activation, is relevant in regards to gender planning. And just to give you a brief introspection into our partner city, Umeå, it is a very highly active city in regards to gender planning, and also we are very proud that they are part of BETS, and we learn a lot from them in other cities. So just to briefly touch on one example that we are tackling in BETS, it's the subjective safety in tunnels. And there we drew from the example of this tunnel here in Umeå, where they work with one, spatial planning, of course, but also the subjective safety elements that can be addressed. Because gender-aware planning recognizes both and responds proactively, not reactively. And it also doesn't stop just creating safe spaces, but we will hear later probably from Linda about the question if the space allows you to express yourself and how easy life is being made by the planning. So from a city perspective in Hamburg, especially women report feeling unsafe in underpasses and tunnels. This impacts their mobility choices automatically. So it isn't just about statistics, it changes the design outcomes that influence behavior, inclusion, and who is invited to use these spaces. So we have a great example here. This tunnel works with spatial planning, as I said, but also the element of distraction. I just realized I didn't go ahead here. So this is what I'm talking about, the tunnel, so sorry about this. The element of distraction is a key factor here, because in this tunnel, they work with visuals and sound, as you can see in the two pictures on the right. These are glass tiles that carry quotes from a Swedish author and poet, Sara Lidman. And it also has a recording of her voice reading those poems. So you get distracted by like a comfortable and positive female voice, which is also important, and kind of distract from the fear. So this is what we took to heart in Altona, where we work also in tunnels, and we used projectors to project different phrases that also are in regards to our BETS themes. On the left side, this is translated from German, walking safely without tunnel vision. And then we have the QR code that directs to our BETS website. And on the right side, we have a tunnel that is very interesting because it starts with 8 meters high and goes low until 2 and 30 meters. So it's a very like narrow feeling in there, and there we use a different kind of phrase. It's step by step, all year round. And we did a quick on-spot survey a few weeks ago in the tunnels. About 50 people responded, and we did like just a quick one with 4 questions. And the first results of the survey show one thing: the intervention draws attention to the space and positively influences how it is perceived, particularly by the female participants. And the rest of us is still evaluated, so still stay tuned for that. So we've now seen examples from our partner cities and BETS pilot activities that show how walking environments can be made safer, particularly for women. Now let's broaden that perspective and look at the other key form of active mobility, which is cycling. So up next, Lauriane, I would hand over to you. She is the CEO of the European Cyclists Federation, as Heike already said, and she will give insights on current EU-level developments in cycling policy and discuss how gender-sensitive planning and infrastructure can better support women to cycle safely and confidently year-round. Yeah, so I will stop sharing and hand over to you, Lauriane. Yes,
Thank you very much for these enlightening words, and thank you very much for inviting ECF to give a perspective. So my name is Lauren Crid. I'm the CEO of the European Cyclist Federation. And what we do essentially is promote cycling through various means, cycling tourism. Of course, a lot of the work we do is on cycling infrastructure, but also cycling and friendly employers network. And we also have a network of cities and regions. So that's broadly the scope. And I'll admit that when I was contacted by BATS, this very interesting project, I was like, ooh, what have we done on women and mobility and all year round mobility? And I was lucky enough that my colleague Otone made some research so that I can give you a bit in a bulk what are the things that we worked on and how we can contribute to this interesting debate. So if you go to the next slide, Otone. So winter conditions, darkness, and genders are three elements that impact perception of safety and comfort. So you have all these factors that can limit the engagement in year-round active mobility for women. They tend to cycle less in winter months, which has been said by the project. This is obviously linked to external factor, but also to the perceived risks and costs associated to cycling in these conditions. And that all depends on gender, hence that sort of graphic that you see on your screen at the moment. On the next slide, you will see a perfect infrastructure, or what we actually have seen contributing to the UNECE as being a good infrastructure. Why is it a good infrastructure? So in that UNECE report, definition for cycling infrastructure that we contributed to, we see this piece of infrastructure fulfills all the criteria needed. There are no narrow turns, there's no obstacles, there's no so-called hiding spots, no dark areas, and an adequate surface no matter what the time of the year. So we felt that this type of structures allows for a quick and safe commute. Of course, we're not yet looking into the snow and ice that was shown in the first slides of the BATS. What we see is that infrastructural safety is good for everyone beyond gender, obviously, but there are still quite some differences into how it is perceived in gender. And we felt that the next slide would be especially interesting for us to look at. So in this slide, you see on the left side, a basic infrastructure for cycling. You see in the middle how female gaze goes around while driving or cycling on that path. And on the total right side, you see the male, where the male cyclists actually look at. You will see that obviously the female look really much broader, looking for potential dangers, a bit all on the side, on the right. So they're less focused on the straight ahead route. They're really kind of scanning the environment way more and way broadly. So this is relating very much to what BATS was saying in the beginning, the kind of a feeling unsafe be it in a tunnel or be it in different areas. So it's really a fear of crime. The way the female experience infrastructure is quite different in that sense. So it clearly shows a broader focus. To encourage a higher share of infrastructure usage amongst women, it's fundamental to have the right lighting, to remove obstacles. You've seen, or you remember the slide before, with a very clean kind of infrastructure without things where you could potentially hide on the side and so on. And to make sure that the landscape is more legible and more safe and at least feels safer. One of the issues is really to remove entrapments, any obstacles, sharp turns, fences, or elements that could impede or slow down an escape, but also would provide hiding spaces potentially for people looking out for mischief, let's say. If you look on the next slide, there's also one element that is quite important and largely documented. It's the choice and social expectations. So if you look into the daily trips and how they're usually, I mean, you could imagine the commuter trip being very direct from home to work and from work to home and back. Women are more likely than men to do a chain trip, to stop at different spaces, to stop for whatever reason. I mean, here we have school and groceries, but of course it can be many reasons. What's important there is to have the possibility, of course, to transit, but also the possibility for safe parking along the way. This is becoming also more important with more expensive electric bicycle, cargo bikes, and so on. So we don't exactly recommend a specific infrastructure to allow for frequent stop, but we really think that we need to have better parking and closer to the different errands that need to be run often the case being by women, not only obviously, but often the case. So there is, on the one hand, what was shown in the first slides are really, okay, how do you design the infrastructure, taking into account that we will have a different perception of risk based on gender. The second one is gender might actually have an impact on your daily trip and the number of stops that you need to have. So how do you make these stops also convenient and safe? Same questions around, are they in the night or in the dark? Are they opportunities to hide behind things? Are they good direct visions, good lighting, especially for the parking? And are they safe and secure, bearing in mind that the theft of bicycle has also become a big issue in the recent month and years, let's say. So what we see, and that's really in the next slide, looking into the quality of the infrastructure. So that's very specific ECF research. There you see a correlation, or you see a graph looking into the percentage of female cyclists and the improved infrastructure. So basically, on the x-axis, you have the improvements of the infrastructure up to 30%. On the y-axis, you have the countries being kind of spread out. What we see here is actually a relatively mild correlation between better infrastructure and higher share of female cycling. The correlation is not that high. It's encouraging, but it's quite small. So we also think that it's a bit of everything. Obviously, the infrastructure will play a key role. This feeling of being safe is very important, but the social elements about all the things that need to be carried out by the different genders will also be fundamental. So there's no perfect infrastructure, but there's a very dire need, I would say, to take into account the female perspective, to get into gender mainstreaming, to get them more on active mobility as well. Especially in the winter and darker months, where basically the perceived risk is higher, linked to the darkness, and to also, well, the climate elements with, more ice and more slippery roads and so on. There's one element that I would say I did not, I literally took out of the presentation. There's one element which is widely stressed by research, but I would say as personally a cyclist as well, I don't feel quite as strongly on that one. But it seems that there's also a relatively broad societal expectations of people to look good or professional in the workplace, and that to a certain extent cycling could go in the way of that. I didn't want to flag it very highly because I think it might impact, but it's not necessarily the whole story, and personally didn't feel super comfortable just flagging that out. I don't necessarily experience it myself, but there's ample literature trying to push for that idea, so that we also wanted to mention. And on the last slide, on the gender mainstreaming questions, so there you have a bit of elements around why and transport and gender mainstreaming generally. So we're really trying to get more women in transport. The way we design infrastructure is also very well impacted by the people that basically do the design, but also the people that work in the sector. You see here that transport is a sector that's still very male dominated. About 22% of transport workers are women. In the design of spaces, it's also interesting to have all perspectives. And you see a different, Otone kindly put the employee share within ACF. So with us, we're at gender parity, I would say, which is very interesting. But what's important is to get that perspective in looking into the infrastructure design and spending quite some money. Whatever suits specifically or is more suitable for women cyclists will also benefit the society as large, as being a safer, more intuitive and better infrastructure moving forward. So with that was just my short introduction. So thanks a lot, Otone, for the work and for the invitation. It allowed me to deep dive a bit into a topic I didn't know much beyond my personal experience. So that was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Florian. We have time now for a couple of questions. I saw someone raise their hand, but then took it down again. I'm not sure if that was an actual question or just a mistake. But if anyone has any questions, they're welcome to ask them now. You can either just write it in the chat or just ask it on camera if you feel comfortable doing that. I had one question that popped into my mind, Lorian, was was in relation to sumps. So I know that the EU has some kind of a, I'm not sure if it's a requirement or a recommendation for cities above a certain size to make these sustainable urban mobility plans. Is there anything? Do you know if there's anything in the sumps that also mandate or recommend cities to work on this kind of gender aspect of urban planning?
It's absolutely an excellent question. Unfortunately, I don't know. You know what? I will check and I will answer in the chat because indeed
Okay.
that would be a good one. But what I would think from the get-go is that it's often not really well taken into account still. But Heike has probably a better, more informed opinion.
Heike, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Lorian, again, that you contributed today to our webinar. Actually, I have another question, and I know ECF, of course, is also working on the TEN-T regulations, and I know ECF is trying really hard in the past decades to get active mobility, cycling, walking into it. So it's just to encourage you to work and to continue on that topic as well. And I think this is also something we will discuss within the Baltic Sea area and SUMPs and TEN-T regulations, how to make it stronger, especially nowadays. So maybe you can refer also to this a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
on.
it's very interesting. Yeah, definitely.
Andrea, do you have a comment?
Yes, if I may, just a brief intervention on the sustainable urban mobility plans. It's something that I briefly looked into, so please, if anyone has a better insight, just feel free to interrupt. But so there is a recommendation to include citizens within the planning phase at different steps of it. And there is also an explicit recommendation in the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan guidelines of 2019 to include vulnerable groups. Now, there is no clear definition and established definition of vulnerable groups, but generally the guideline points to an inclusion of all society as equal and creating the conditions for true equality within society.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds maybe a bit general still, but it's better than nothing, I guess.
It is indeed quite general, and it is anyways a guideline and not necessarily a legislative.
Yeah, not necessarily followed, right? Yeah. Okay. But thanks, Andrea. One question from Isabel.
Yes, hi. I had my hand raised earlier, but it was actually an accident. But now I have a question. Thanks a lot, Laurian, for this nice presentation. I was wondering if there's any education or like trainings for the planners to be aware of, gender-specific planning, because I agree. You said like there should be more women in general in planning. That's really important, but also for the current planners, like what can we do to help them be aware of these topics?
I think it's a very good way to approach it. I'm not aware personally of this at the moment, but we can have a look and we can definitely talk to Polis and Eurocities representing cities to get a couple of very good examples as well. I think that would be the first, my first hint at trying to understand where it works well. It's always super helpful to have good examples of things that have been implemented and how they have been. But I'll take that on board and I'll write back to the organizers if I have anything relevant.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Lorian. I think now we're gonna continue in our program and pass over to Linda from the city of Umeå, who's gonna tell us a bit about how they work with gender neutral planning there. Linda, are you able to share your slides?
Share my screen? Hi. I hope so.
Yes. Excellent. Yes.
Just one sec. Can you see it full screen now?
Yep. Works.
Super. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Linda Gustafsson. I work with gender equality and social sustainability for the city of Umeå in Sweden. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work that we do in Umeå in relation to urban planning and mobility in transport. First of all, working with gender equality, I just want to set the scene also with the infrastructure for working with gender equality in the city of Umeå. There's an overarching goal from the city that the city of Umeå shall create conditions for women and men to have equal power to shape society and their own lives. And if you work in transport, if you work with mobility, if you work with infrastructure and planning, of course, that then relates to what are the tools in those toolboxes that can help create the conditions for women and men to have equal power to shape society as well as their own lives. There's a gender equality committee connected to the city council that's been in place for 30 plus years. There's a strategy for gender equality work adopted by the city council, and the image on the right is our city council room, and on the wall we have 4 images of women that have been important for the work in Umeå when it comes to gender equality, inspired by the city of Frankfurt that we work together with that had something similar also in their city hall. Just going back, the city of Umeå has worked for a long time with gender equality. The Gender Equality Committee has been in place for a long time. It has not always been connected to the city council, but there's been a committee with politicians responsible for gender equality issues in the city since the late 1970s. And I often include this image because I just want to, it's kind of both a little bit funny and a little bit sad at the same time, because this was the Gender Equality Committee informs in 1981 their information to the city council, and what we see is what they also highlighted in 1981 are issues that we also work with, maybe in a little bit differently, but also a lot of it or some of it is still the same. So they talked about the importance of gender segregated data. They talked about urban planning and how planning a city where services are close is good for women. And they also talked about public transportation. And this, from 1981, it states that 80% of those who travel by bus are women. It's not like that in Umeå anymore. But we still see, of course, gendered structures in the usage of public transportation, and especially also just in relation to sustainable modes of transportation. Added bonus in this is also something that I feel all European cities should sort of take back, which is that the images are drawn by the politicians in the committee. So they illustrated their own pamphlet. So the fact that the city of Umeå has worked for a long time is probably also why the city of Umeå has been highlighted as a city sort of famous for its gender equality work, and not least, of course, when it comes to urban planning and also when it comes to mobility and infrastructure, highlighting the examples of the city. And in the last two and a half years, I've gotten the question almost more times than I can count if Umeå is a gender equal city, and it's not. So Umeå is not a gender equal city, and I know of no gender equal city in the world. But what I can say is that Umeå has the ambition to work actively with gender equality, and we can see that when you have that ambition and you have that goal and you put structures in place, and then you also get some kind of result. Both the overarching goal for the city, which I showed on my first slide, but then of course this is also a very important strategy, which is a comprehensive plan for sustainable growth in Umeå. And we're also that everybody should take part, and gender equality should be part of the urban planning is of course also an important sort of steering of the work in Umeå. And when we work with gender equality, I think one key issue for the city of Umeå is that when we work with gender equality, we look at gender equality as a way to develop the city. It's working with gender equality in all policy areas is something that develops the city, and it's something that makes the city attractive to live in. It's something that makes people feel at home in the city. And our method for working with gender equality is something that we call the gendered landscape. So we talk about Umeå as a gendered city, or we talk about the gendered landscape. We also, a couple of years back, we led an European project financed by the URBAC program about gender equality in European cities, called also Gendered City. So what we mean when we talk about the gendered landscape, and this is, of course, crucial in relation to how we move around in the city, is that there are different types of power structures that we always need to think about. That the city is a gendered landscape due to certain things. For example, that we have in Sweden and in Umeå, much more in comparison to many other European countries, we have a very gender segregated labor market, meaning that women and men work in different fields, which also often means that women and men work in different parts of the city geographically. It also means that women and men work different hours. Men work much more in the private sector, and women work more in the public sector. There are also then, in relation to the gender segregated labor market, but not only, is that we have groups of women and groups of men have different economic conditions. We spend our free time a little bit differently. We transport ourselves differently. The expectations, but also maybe the needs, are different. The possibilities, what you talked about just earlier, the possibilities to influence the design, is it the same for everyone? One important factor also, how we perceive and how we move around and how we feel about the city, is also the unpaid care and domestic work, which we clearly can see that women take a larger responsibility for the unpaid care and domestic work, meaning also that women are more prone to working part-time, for example, because they work more unpaid, so they work less paid. Men's violence against women, which is of course a factor when we talk about both life at home, but also life in public spaces. And then, which I think also is important, this sense of entitlement and ownership over our public spaces. Not only who has the possibility to influence how we design our services and our sort of structures of the city, but also who feels like they have a right to say what they think, who feels like their opinion matters. And we know that that is also different due to different types of power structures, because also important to understand when we work with gender equality in the city of Umeå, we work with groups of women and groups of men, but within also, but what is maybe more important is to work with different power structures, and power structures can be different things. Of course, you live in Umeå. Do you have Swedish as your first language? If not, how can you sort of perceive the city? How can you move around in the city if you don't speak Swedish? Are you able-bodied or not? Like age is also a factor, of course, where you were born, and so on and so on. So that there are, of course, many different types of power structures that we need to understand, and that also comes down to this. I think that the most important thing is to search for knowledge on life conditions of the people that live in the city that you're working in, and which then leads to sort of the pink box on the in the corner, which is data collection. So much the work that we do in Umeå, we try to be very data driven. So what do we know? And I think this is, I mean, for all of you listening, if you work in an organization, you work for a city, what kind of data collection do we have? What do we know about the people living in our city? What do we know about the life conditions of this city? Because what someone also said earlier, if we have 80% of those who plan sort of infrastructure, if they are men, and they are educated and so on, and you can see that the life conditions are maybe quite similar. One thing to change that can be to, of course, get more people with other types of experience, more women into planning, but there are also other ways to increase the knowledge, and that is to, to understand the life conditions through what kind of register data do we have, and we know that this is different in different European countries. What kind of data are we allowed to collect, for example? What kind of data do we have a tradition of collecting? Do we collect data on national, on regional, on local level? Sweden collects a lot of data. Our personal numbers are also connected to gender, meaning that all sort of register data can be gender segregated. And that's one thing. Another thing is, of course, what kind of surveys do we make? What do we ask the citizens when we ask them something, and how can we also trace that back to different type, what kind of groups answer what in our different surveys? If you don't have registered data, you can't do any big surveys, for example, on local level. Okay, but can you observe? How can you observe a bus stop? Can you observe a park? Can you see who is actually using this space and so on? So I think that data collection is sort of one of my key inputs to have data collection and to understand life conditions, so that we can have that knowledge with us when we plan and build the cities in different ways. Also just wanted to highlight two videos. This is one that we made, and you can find it on the Umeå Kommun website, about gender equality in the city of Umeå, with also examples from public space and examples focusing on transport and mobility. And the other one, and this was also someone who mentioned training, and this might be a tip also, EIT explaining urban mobility, I think is sort of the tagline, is made they just released it like last week, and this is also, it's like a 9-minute video, and it's about the city of Umeå. It's not, we didn't make it, but it's about working with gender equality and how can cities become more gender inclusive. And I think it's quite informative about both examples, but then also some tips. There was an image of the Lev tunnel earlier, but these are some then going into some examples of working with gender equality and in public space and in relation to moving around the city in different parts of the year and the day. Because one thing, of course, with all of the BUTS participants is, which is something, I mean, you're all familiar with that. Also that we need to explain also sometimes that in a city like Umeå or in other cities similar to Umeå, darkness doesn't mean nighttime. It's dark at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and so darkness doesn't equal nighttime. And that's of course something that differs our cities also maybe from other cities and has an influence on planning. But then also, of course, the different conditions throughout the year. This is the Lev tunnel, which is under the railway station, and this was where, when this was to be built, there was a decision made to include an active work with gender equality. And some of the results from that is there was an added exit in the middle to increase this feeling of safety and security, that if I walk down into the tunnel and it doesn't feel safe for some reason, I should be able to exit it. There is also, which was then mentioned earlier, also it's a 130-meter long glass artwork that follows one of the walls, which is also then with quotes from the author Sara Lidman, she was born in Västerbotten, the county where Umeå is located, and also the quotes that are on the wall, but also sort of in the bike lane, were also voted on. So you could vote on your favorite quotes in the tunnel as a citizen in Umeå, or it was an open vote, so it could have been citizens from everywhere, but you could vote on your favorite quotes. And I think that's also an important thing. This going back to this feeling of being able to influence also the design of the public spaces. Quite obvious things in the tunnel is that there are no pillars in the middle. It's quite wide, and especially it feels wide. So, you know, you should be able to meet someone pushing a pram, should be able to meet someone who is in a wheelchair without any of them having to sort of go out into the bike lane. The bike lane should also be able to meet two quite large bikes at least without it feeling unsafe. Lighting in the roof, similar to a natural light. And then all the corners are rounded also, so you can't get the sense that someone could be hiding behind something. Another two examples is on the left, we have the Station of Being, which is a bus stop created within the Horizon Project Ruggedized, focusing mainly on energy efficiency, but here also adding knowledge when it comes to gender equality or gender inequality, also based on observations of people's behavior at bus stops. So a Dutch artist that was involved in this process observed people's behaviors at bus stops in Umeå, and saw quite quickly that also then in the winter time when it's quite cold, it's snowing, people tend to stand beside the sort of the small shelter that exists, because in a city like Umeå that isn't very dense, in large parts of the city, we're not used to standing very close to people when we wait for public transportation. We're used to having sort of our personal space. If you compare it to cities that are very dense, where people absolutely expect to, when you stand and you wait for public transportation, you stand super close to another person. But that also, like, how do we behave when we are in these places? So therefore, it was decided that there should be these individual wooden pods, and you can shift them with your body weight so that when the snow comes from one direction, you can move it around to be sheltered. But then also understanding this preservation of energy for people walking around in public space, which I think is key also in working with gender equality, is that the pods only go down to knee height, so that when you enter, sort of when you see the space, you can see if someone is already standing there, so you don't get surprised by someone sort of turning around or hiding. And on the right, you see which is also quite geographically close to the Station of Being. Station of Being, I can say that each bus has a connected light and sound. That's also this preservation of energy, that waiting for the bus shouldn't be this constant looking out for the bus, that it should be this short time between maybe work and you're going home, where you can relax and just take a moment. And if you constantly have to sort of peek out to see if the bus is coming, then that's sort of disturbs that time for you. So each bus has a light that lights up. So when the bus number 7 comes, for example, then it goes green, and then there's a specific sound also that is connected to that bus line. So you don't have to look for the bus. You should hear and see the lights. And on the right, you can see the Eastern Station, which also railway station close to the Station of Being, also super close to the hospital, which is somewhere where a lot of women work. And in building this also, there was dialogue and inclusion of nurses at the hospital, focusing what they wanted. And you can see that it's almost all glass, which has to do with light, but also this sense of maybe being able to be seen when you enter into it. Also, it's a large stairwell, so that you can see large parts of the station when you enter into it. And that was also something that was highlighted in the dialogue. So going back to surveys, we do a large travel habit survey. This is something that you might know already, but we do quite large travel habit surveys, gender segregated, and we can see that women travel more sustainable than men. This is not news, but what I think is important here also is to talk, how do we talk about this? One of the things that we talk about in the city of Umeå is that talking about investments or efforts to decrease climate emissions, that is it more effective to have an investment where we electrify the buses, or where we get men to take the bus, what would decrease the climate emissions more? And it's obvious that getting more men to take the bus would decrease the climate emissions much more than electrifying. But still, looking at it, also what was mentioned earlier about training, looking at what can we learn from each other? We can see that when we talk about electrifying things, then there's a lot to be learned, and there's a lot of exchanges all the time. But when it comes to behavior and how we change behavior and how we encourage other behavior, then that is something where we don't really have a lot of exchange. Of course, there is some, but not super much. Another thing also when it comes to the travel habit survey that we do is that what we also see is that women walk to a very high extent. Women walk to work. And of course, that also relates to, because women walk much more than the men do as a form of transportation. And of course, this is super